When I pulled up that dirt road for the first time in years, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My ranch, my land, my home, or at least it used to be. The wind carried the same dry, wild scent of cedar and dust I grew up with, and for a second I could almost pretend nothing had changed. But as I slowed near the gate, I saw them, the signs. Bright, freshly planted HOA signs, stuck into the soil like an infection spreading across what was mine. You ever had that sinking feeling in your stomach? The kind where your heart knows before your brain catches up? That's what it felt like. Because in my absence, in the years I had been away handling things I won't get into just yet, something had wormed its way onto my land. And waiting right there by the gate, arms crossed like she owned the whole county, was Karen. I didn't know her yet, but the stance, the glare, the way she had that smug half-smilo, I knew the type. The self-appointed sheriff of the block. The type that lives for control, thrives on power that nobody asked them to wield. I rolled down my window, forcing a polite smile. "Afternoon," I said. Calm, steady. Her eyes flicked over me like I didn't belong, like I was trespassing on my own property. "You can't park here," she snapped. Before I even introduced myself, something inside me tightened. But I kept my tone measured. "Ma'am, I'm not parking. This is my ranch. I grew up here." And then she laughed. I'll never forget that laugh. It's not the kind that comes from joy or humor, no. This was the kind of laugh people use when I think they've already won. "This is under the jurisdiction of the Homeowners Association now," she said, like it was a badge of honor. "And if you don't move along, I'll have to call the cops." Imagine standing on the soil where your father bled, where your mother prayed, where your childhood dog is buried under the oak tree and being told you don't belong. Imagine the rage boiling under your skin, fighting with the disbelief, crashing against the restraint you've built up over a lifetime. I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell her exactly who she was dealing with. But instead I leaned back in my seat studying her, because here's the things. Sometimes silence is louder than words. And Karen, she wasn't prepared for silence. She filled it with more venom. "You people think you can just show up? Well, not here. We have standards, rules. You can't just leave a place looking like that." She gestured toward the gate at the weeds that had crept up after years of neglect. I didn't move, didn't blink. And that's when she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling them," she said. "You're trespassing." And just like that, she dialed 911. Her voice suddenly dripping with false sweetness as she told the dispatcher a suspicious man was parked at the entrance. Suspicious man? That's what I was now, on my own land. My knuckles tightened around the steering wheel, but I didn't leave. Wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Wasn't going to let her think fear could chase me away. And here's where I want you to pay close attention, because moments like these, they're the true test. Anyone can talk about standing up for what's right, but when the flashing lights start rolling down that dusty road, when the weight of authority bears down on you, that's when you find out who you really are. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up minutes later, dust clouding behind it. 2 deputies stepped out, hands on their belts, scanning the scene, and Karen. She lit up like Christmas. "Officers, thank God you're here," she called, hurrying toward them with her voice high and urgent. "This man won't leave. He says this ranch is his, but it's not. He's harassing me." The deputies turned to me, eyes sharp but cautious. "Sir, can we see some ID?" I took a breath, steadying myself. Every nerve in my body screamed to lash out, to unleash the truth all at once. But instead, I reached slowly into my wallet, pulled out my driver's license, and handed it over. The deputy looked at it, then at me, then back at Karen. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this ID shows his name, his address right here." Karen's face faltered for just a second, but then she doubled down. "That doesn't matter. This property is part of the HOA now, and he doesn't meet the standards. He can't just walk in like he owns the place." And that's when I couldn't hold back any longer. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching on the gravel, and looked her dead in the eye. "Karen," I said, my voice low, deliberate, carrying the weight of everything I'd held back, "you have no idea who you're dealing with." She scoffed. rolling her eyes like it was some cliché line from a movie. But the deputies leaned in, curious now. Because here's the truth. She didn't know truth I'd kept close to my chest until that very moment. I wasn't just some man returning to a forgotten ranch. I wasn't just a landowner reclaiming his soil. I was something much bigger, something that would turn her smug little kingdom upside down. I oversee HOAs, not one, not two, every single one. In this country now, I didn't say it outright not then, not yet. Right. Timing is everything. And I knew the power of silence. It's the power of letting someone underestimate you right up until the moment you drop the hammer. So instead, I turned to the deputies and said, "Officers, I can assure you this woman is overstepping her authority. I have full rights to this land. If she'd like to challenge that, she can bring the proper paperwork. Till then, I suggest she'd stop making false reports." One deputy exchanged a glance with the other. They weren't going to escalate it. They weren't going to give Karen the satisfaction. But Karen wasn't done. She never is, right? People like her. They feed off the fight. She started raising her voice, waving her arms, demanding they remove me. And here's where I want you to think about something. How many times in life have you been accused of something you didn't do? How many times have you been painted as the villain when all you were doing was standing in your truth? That burn, that it gets real. And it's powerful. I stayed calm. I let her scream. Because sometimes the loudest person in the room proves themselves a fool. Eventually, the deputy stepped in, telling her to calm down, warning her that false reporting could lead to consequences. And that's when I saw it, the first crack in her armor. Her smile wavered. It's her confidence. Slipped, but inside I wasn't celebrating yet, because this was just the beginning. I climbed back into my truck, slowly, deliberately, and started driving through the gate. Karen was still fuming, her face red, her voice shrill as she shouted after me, "You'll regret this. HOA doesn't let people like you just walk all over us." Her words echoed in my ears, but they didn't sting. No, they fueled me, because I knew something she didn't, something that would change everything. And as I rolled onto that ranch road, dust rising behind me, I made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't just reclaiming my land. I was about to show Karen and every single person who thinks power comes from bullying that there's a force far greater than their little games. Now, I want you to stick with me, because if you've ever been wronged, if you've ever had someone stand in your way, if you've ever been underestimated by people who thought they were untouchable, you're going to want to hear how this plays out, because this isn't just my story. This is every one of our stories. And before I go any further, let me ask you this. What would you have done? If you came home to find strangers staking claim to your history, your roots, your very identity, would you walk away? Or would you stand tall? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know I'm not the only one who feels this fire burning inside. When the dust finally settled behind me, and the gates of my ranch closed again, I just sat there for a while.
Oh.
The silence hit me harder than Karen's screeching ever could. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence you expect out on open land. No birds, no cattle lowing in the distance, no rustling of wind through trees. Just a hollow quiet, the kind that makes you realize how much has changed when you weren't looking. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against gravel, and stared out across the fields. Dry grass stretched where green pastures used to be. The barn sagged under years of neglect. And beyond it all, the oak tree where my father used to sit at dusk stood tall, stubborn against time. That tree didn't bow to anyone. Not the storms. Not the heat, and certainly not the likes of Karen, but as I walked toward the house, the feeling of being watched lingered. I glanced over my shoulder, and sure enough, there she was. Karen, standing at the edge of the property line with binoculars pressed to her face, like some kind of cheap detective out of a dime store novel. I almost laughed. Almost. But then I thought about what it meant. She wasn't just nosy. She was staking her claim. She believed with her whole chest that this place belonged under her thumb. And that, right there, is why people like her are dangerous. It's not because they're strong, but because they truly believe their illusions of power. And they'll fight, tooth and nail, to protect it. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first: dust, mildew, and the faint, lingering trace of home. Every creak of the wooden floorboards carried memories, but they were wrapped in cobwebs now. Still, this was mine. This was the ground my family built from nothing. And I swore right then and there that no clipboard-wielding, HOA-obsessed tyrant was going to rip it from me. But life has a way of testing promises. Karen wasn't done testing mine. That night I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. At first I thought maybe it was a friend or a neighbor stopping by to welcome me back. But when I looked through the window, my jaw tightened. It was her again. This time she wasn't alone. She had two other HOA board members with Herman in polo shirts, tucked too tight into khakis, holding flashlights and clipboards like they were storming the beaches of Normandy. I stepped onto the porch. Before they even got out of the car, evening. I called, trying to keep my temper in check. Karen stepped forward, smug as ever. We're here for an inspection. HOA protocol. You can't just start living here without approval. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Approval? Lady, I don't need anyone's approval to sleep under my own roof. Her jaw clenched. If you refuse, we'll have to issue fines. And if you don't pay, I cut her off. And if I don't? Pay what? You'll tow my truck? Put a lien on the land my family's held for generations. Do you even know who you're talking to? That rattled her for a second, but, like always, she came back swinging. The rules are the rules. Nobody is above them. Now here's the thing about rules. They're only as strong as the people who enforce them. Karen had no idea the weight I carried. She didn't know the reach of the authority sitting quietly in my back pocket. I looked at her board members, who were starting to look a little less confident. Gentlemen, I said, steady and calm, do yourselves a favor. Go home tonight, enjoy dinner with your families, because if you keep following her lead, you're going to find yourselves tangled in something much bigger than this little neighborhood association. They exchanged uneasy glances, and one of them muttered, Karen, maybe we should, but she spun on him, eyes blazing. No, we're not backing down. He thinks he's untouchable, but he's not. Everyone has to answer to the HOA. That was when I decided enough was enough. I walked down the steps, slow and deliberate, closing the distance between us. Karen stiffened, but didn't move. I stopped just short of her and spoke low, so only she could hear. You think you hold the reins? I said. But what you don't know is that every HOA in this country, every board, every rule, they all answer to me. You've been barking up the wrong tree, Karen, and if you don't step carefully, you're going to find out just how small your power really is. Her eyes widened for just a split second, the mask slipping, but then she tried to recover, scoffing, laughing it off like I was bluffing. You're delusional, she snapped. Nobody oversees every HOA. That's not even possible. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. Because the truth has a way of weighing heavier than words, she stormed off, dragging her board members behind her, muttering threats about fines in court, but I could see it in her eyes. As she left, the first seeds of doubt were planted. The next morning, it escalated. I woke to find notices plastered all over my gate. Fines for overgrown grass, unauthorized. Structure, failure to submit design plans. Page after page of nonsense violations, each one more ridiculous than the last. I pulled them down one by one and burned them in a barrel by the barn. The flames licked high, devouring her paper bullets, and for the first time since I returned, I felt a small taste of victory, but the war wasn't over. No, she doubled down. She sent letters. She called the sheriff again. She rallied the board, trying to paint me as some outsider who thought he was above the law. And here's the thing. When people like her feel cornered, they get dangerous. One evening I caught her, trespassing. She was in my backyard with a measuring tape, muttering to herself about setbacks and easements. Karen, I said sharply, stepping into the yard. You're on my land. That's trespassing. You need to leave. She froze, then turned slowly, eyes narrowing. I'm documenting violations. You can't stop me.
Aunt.
I took a step closer, voice low. If you don't leave right now, you're not going to be dealing with HOA rules anymore. We'll be dealing with the law. For once, she backed down, but I saw the fury in her face, the kind that doesn't die easy, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a nosy neighbor anymore. This was about something bigger. About people like Karen all across the country who use HOAs like weapons, who thrive on intimidation and bullying, who strip away people's dignity one fine at a time. This wasn't just about saving my ranch. This was about making a stand, and I knew I had the power to do it. Because unlike Karen, my authority wasn't built on fear, wasn't built on clipboards and petty rules. Mine came from the very foundation that gave her power in the first place. The system she thought she ruled was mine to command. I didn't say it yet, not out loud. Timing again is everything. But the fire was building inside me, and I knew the time was coming when she'd see exactly who she was dealing with. 4. Now I let her think she was winning. I let her pile on her fake violations. Let her whisper lies to the neighbors. Let her dig herself deeper into the hole she was creating. Because the deeper she went, the harder the fall would be. And when that fall came, oh, she'd never forget it. So I ask you, what would you have done in my boots? Would you fight fire with fire? Or would you let them burn themselves out? Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in the strike, but in the patience before. Drop your thoughts below, because I know some of you have faced your own Karens. Trust me, you're not alone. The days that followed were a blur of tension. Every morning, I'd wake to find something new. Another notice. Another threat. Another desperate attempt by Karen to convince me that I was the intruder in my own life. It almost became comical. The way she scrambled for control like a dog chasing its own tail, convinced it was winning. But beneath the ridiculousness, there was a darker undercurrent. Karen wasn't satisfied with paperwork anymore. She wanted war. I noticed it in the way she watched me. No longer with the smug confidence of someone who thought they had the upper hand. Now, there was something else in her eyes. Fear. The kind of fear that breeds recklessness. And I knew it was only a matter of time before she went too far. One evening, I was sitting on the porch as the sun set, watching the sky burn orange. Over the fields, the quiet was broken by the rumble of engines. I stood, my chest tightening as 3 SUVs rolled up the road. Headlights cutting through the dust. Karen stepped out first, of course, but this time she had backup. Not just board members. She'd brought a private security team in black uniforms, hands resting on their holsters. Trying to look intimidating, she strutted forward, chin high like a general leading her troops. "This is your last chance," she declared. "Leave this property, or we'll remove you ourselves." For a long moment, I didn't move. I just looked at her, then at the men she'd dragged into her mess. They didn't look so sure of themselves. Their eyes darted around, taking in the land, the barn, the silence that seemed to press heavier with each second. I finally stepped down from the porch. "Karen," I said quietly, "you've crossed a line. You've harassed me. You've trespassed. You've abused every ounce of authority you thought you had. And now you've brought armed men onto my property to threaten me." Her smirk faltered, but she didn't back down. No match for the HOA," she spat. "You're just one man." That was it. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder thick, stamped, official. The weight of it was more than paper. It was the culmination of everything I'd held back. Everything I'd let her underestimate. I handed it to the lead security guard, not to her. "Read it," I told him. He hesitated, then opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, and I saw the blood drain from his face. He looked at Karen, then back at me, his hands trembling slightly, because what he held wasn't just some deed or title. It was authority, federal recognition, documentation that made it clear. Every HOA in this country, every board, every committee, they all answered to one oversight body, and I was the one who oversaw it. Karen's face twisted as she realized. "No, that's fake. That's not possible." But the guard shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, this is real." I stepped closer, my voice steady, calm, carrying the weight of truth. "Karen, all this time you thought you were the queen of your little kingdom, but your kingdom is under my watch. Your board, your rules, your power, it all flows through the system I oversee. And you've been abusing it. For once she had no words. The fire, the fury, the endless self-righteousness, it all cracked. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked smaller then, not the tyrant who had screamed at me at the gate, not the bully who had called the cops on me, just a woman who'd built her identity on control, only to find it ripped away. The guards stepped back, refusing to follow her orders anymore. Even her board members, who had trailed behind her like shadows, couldn't meet her eyes. She was alone. And in that silence I made my choice. I could have destroyed her right then, pulled every string, ended her position, stripped her of every ounce of authority she thought she had. But I didn't, because here's the thing. True power isn't in crushing someone. It's in showing restraint when you could. I looked at her one last time. Karen, this land is mine. It always has been, and it always will be. You're done here. And if you ever try to step foot on my property again, you won't be dealing with HOA rules. You'll be dealing with me. Her face crumpled. And for a moment I almost pitied her. Almost she turned, storming back to her SUV, shouting at the others to follow. But they hesitated. And when she realized no one was behind her, the humiliation cut deeper than anything I could have said. She slammed her door and drove off, a cloud of dust swallowing her retreat. The others stayed behind just long enough to mumble apologies, then left quietly, heads bowed, and then it was just me, standing under the wide Texas sky, the ranch stretching around me like it had been waiting for this moment all along. I walked back to the porch and sat down, the cool night air settling over me. For the first time since I returned, I felt peace. Real peace. Not because Karen was gone, but because I'd stood my ground. I hadn't let her lies define me. I hadn't let her threats drive me away. And maybe that's the lesson in all this. Life will always have its Karen's people who thrive on control, who feed on intimidation, who believe their rules make them untouchable. But power built on fear is fragile, crumbles the moment it meets truth. My ranch wasn't just land, it was a legacy. Reminder that roots run deeper than paperwork, deeper than rules written by people who don't understand the soil beneath. Their feet, no matter how many notices she posted, how many fines she threatened, she couldn't take that from me. So I sat there that night, watching the stars come out one by one, and I realized something. This wasn't just my victory. It was for every person who's ever been pushed around. Every family who's ever been bullied by someone who thought authority made them God. It was proof that you don't have to bow. You don't have to break. You can stand tall, even when the world tries to tell you you're small. And that's what I want you to take away from this. Because I know some of you listening right now have been there. Maybe not on a ranch. Maybe not against an HOA. But against something. Someone. A force that told you you didn't belong. So tell me, how is this story for you? Have you faced your own battles against people who thought they held all the cards? I want to hear your opinion, because stories like these don't just belong to me. They belong to all of us.